Hey everybody, how are you today? It's me, Mrs. Snook. I just wanted to remind you guys that there are Google Meets still and that you need to attend one if you're watching this video and you're a remote learner. So Google Meets are on Tuesdays and Fridays at 2:30. There wasn't one last Friday because I had to go to the doctor, but in general, they're Tuesdays and Fridays at 2:30. You need to attend one a week, and you've got this is part of your participation grade, which makes up 5% of your overall grade. So please make sure you're there. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about basically the primary source documents about Andrew Carnegie. We're going to be talking about how to structure your writing assignment this week, reviewing for your quiz on Wednesday. So it'd be a great day to attend tomorrow, and if not, I hope to see you on Friday. But send me an email if you can't make it, if something's going on, if you're sick, let me know. So let's get into today's lecture. So the focus of today is to talk more about Andrew Carnegie, and we're continuing on with our discussion of Chapter 5, Section 3, where we're really learning more about these industrialists, these businessmen of the Second Industrial Revolution during the Gilded Age. And we're trying to analyze the facts and determine, in your opinion at least, are these men robber barons, or do they have the traits, the characteristics of a hero, as you wrote down last week? Now, in the last lecture, we talked a lot about people like Cornelius Vanderbilt, one of the infamous men of the Gilded Age, and we said that there's evidence that he could be a robber baron, but there's also evidence that he could be a hero. And the same is definitely true for Andrew Carnegie, and I'm mispronouncing his name. Now I'm starting to think it's Carnegie. If you watched that video that I posted from History Channel, I watched it too, but for some reason my memory I can never remember how to say this man's name. I feel like I need to rewatch that video. So Andrew Carnegie, he grows up poor. When he's only about 12 years old, he moves to America from Scotland, and he takes odd jobs. He works in the telegraph office. He's incredibly smart and talented. He eventually works for a railroad company and kind of, works his way up to management. And instead of sticking with the railroad industry, when he's in London, he meets Henry Bessemer. And in case you forgot, Henry Bessemer is the man who takes iron, removes the impurities, and creates steel, and creates this, this Bessemer process, this steelmaking process. And he meets the man, and Carnegie's like, wow, this is cool. We're going to need steel in America because, if Cornelius Vanderbilt and Jay Gould are creating all these railroads and this transcontinental railroad, and they're connecting America, and people are shipping goods, and they're traveling west, you're going to need steel for all those railroad tracks. And he's like, if I go in the steel industry, I'll make a fortune. And so he creates U.S. Steel, a very profitable business, which expands into a corporation. And remember, I was talking about a corporation last week. A corporation is a type of business that is just huge. It's so big that you start selling stock in your company. And U.S. Steel, his corporation, becomes the largest one by 1901, way bigger than Cornelius Vanderbilt's or Jay Gould's or anybody else's. So remember, there's a difference here in terms of types of business. If I own my own little lemonade stand, that's a sole proprietorship. If I take on a partner who's going to help me do the work and split the profits and perhaps gives me some money for the business to buy more lemons, that's a partnership. Now, if people like our lemonade, not because the government tells them to like it or that they have to buy so many cups, but it's priced right and it's delicious and people are thirsty and, it's just an awesome product and people are going to buy it, and my company will make money. I'll sell lemonade, and our company will start to grow and expand, and I'll want to have more lemonade stands. Maybe I'll want to have frozen lemonade. Maybe I want to have lemonade available in restaurants or grocery stores. Who knows? I'll need advertising, and at this point in history, it'd be through magazines. The radio will first be coming out here, and they'll want advertising on the radio. So all of these things are going to be coming, but we're not quite ready for the radio at this point in history. And if my company is doing well, I would offer people to buy stock in my company or ownership. So if they've got $50, I'd say, give me the money and I can use it, and you can have stock or partial ownership. You can't really tell me what to do though. And in the meantime, I'll use that money to open up a new factory, to buy more lemons, to have advertising, you name it. If I sell lemonade, I'm making money, there's profits, then the price of the stock will go up. And as a consumer, when you play the stock market, which is kind of a new thing at this point during the Gilded Age, you want to buy when the price is low and you want to sell when the price is high to make money. And obviously, that's kind of the goal. If, of course, unfortunately, like if it turned out that my lemonade caused cancer or somebody lost a finger while they were, chopping up the lemons and it got stuck in somebody's glass of lemonade, people might stop drinking it, right? I know it sounds gross, but they'd stop drinking the lemonade. My profits would tank. I'd go out of business. That would then, if I started losing money, the price of the stock would go down. And of course, a person would want to sell their stock in my company. It's kind of just a little overview there of how the stock market works. Now, as you read the primary sources and completed the primary source questions, you should have been thinking about kind of, who wrote the document and what was their intention, thinking about that SOAPs analysis that I posted the other day. Did they have bias? What was their purpose for writing it? Were they trying to persuade? Who was the intended audience, etc. And, it should have helped kind of paint this picture in your mind about whether Andrew Carnegie was a good guy, whether he was a captain of industry. Was he a hero? Did he have concern for others? Think about those traits he wrote down the other day. Or is he a robber baron? Is he focused on his own wealth and lavish lifestyle? And that's what we're going to be kind of talking more and more about. Now, as far as how he got so rich in the steel industry, how he created this largest corporation in the world, it really came about because he's very efficient. He was constantly innovating and trying to find, new ways to make steel so that it would be faster, so it would be stronger, and so it would be cheaper. And he was always having accountants who tracked every single dollar spent. How many squares of toilet paper did, employees use? And that sounds like crazy, like a penny pincher, but he really was tracking all of his money. And he was trying to use incentives to get his employees to work hard, like, hey, you worked extra hard. I see you motivating the other employees. I'm going to give you a bonus, or he'll offer them stock in the company. But on the same point, if you're late to work more than once, you can expect he very well may fire you. He could be very ruthless. And he was willing to take over other companies who basically got in his way. And he was always looking for a way to save a buck. Now, he definitely represents the American dream. As immigrants are pouring into America to escape problems at home, or the Irish are trying to escape the potato famine, they are inspired by this man who was a poor immigrant, who came from nothing and was able to become a millionaire. It's really the classic tale of the Gilded Age when you look at Andrew Carnegie. And he symbolizes all these opportunities and wealth, which is what immigrants wanted. But remember, in reality, immigrants coming to America do not get rich. The homes are not really made in America out of gold. It's gold paint. It's gilded, so to speak. It's a fake golden era, which remember Mark Twain wrote about, that things are not as easy as they seem. Now, as far as how Andrew Carnegie made his money, well, one of the ways that he made his money is through consolidations, or what we call mergers. Basically, it's the idea that one company basically attacks or takes over another. And when I say attacks, I don't mean like physically attacks, like they're going to war, but I mean like makes them fall apart, makes them lose business, or he just pays to buy them. So there's two types of mergers or consolidations here. We've got vertical integration versus horizontal integration. You're going to need to know the difference between each of these for the test, and you're going to need to realize that Carnegie, for the most part, uses vertical integration, and John Rockefeller tends to use horizontal integration. And so vertical integration, you can kind of see in the picture there, it's the idea that one company takes over all the suppliers and distributors it needs. And I always think of this as when I make Rice Krispies. So for my lemonade stand, if I decided that I was going to start selling treats as well, so it wouldn't just be my name. Usually my family calls me Annie because my name is Andrea. So it wouldn't just be Annie's Lemonade. Maybe I'm going to sell popcorn, I don't know, chips, pretzels, something, and Rice Krispie treats. So if I was going to make Rice Krispie treats, if you've made them before, you should know the ingredients, right? You need marshmallows and butter and cereal. Pretty easy thing to make. Well, if I had to go to Walmart and buy all these marshmallows and buy all this cereal and buy all this butter, it's going to add up in price, right? Because they've kind of upped the costs. So then I have to obviously pay someone to make the Rice Krispies, and then I sell the Rice Krispie treats. So I'm making a profit, but I'm not making as much money as I could. I would make way more money if I bought up the entire Rice Krispie treat factory, the marshmallow factory, and the dairy where the butter was made. And that's what you can see in the picture here. The man who wants to take over the cattle industry, first he buys up all the cattle, right? Pays all the cowboys, now they work for him, buys up all the cattle. Then he buys up the slaughterhouse where the cattle are actually butchered. He also buys train cars so that the cattle can be shipped across the country alive or dead, okay? Then he buys warehouses so that he can store this meat that's been butchered. And he also buys meat packaging plants, so places where, if you've ever bought ground beef, it comes in that, it's wrapped in plastic or brown paper. He buys that. And then last but not least, he buys like the delivery wagons. And you can see in the picture there, back then, before cars, it's all horse and buggy, delivering meat to a grocery store and such, or you would buy it directly from a butcher. But if you wanted to basically be the king of meat packing, you would have to buy all of those supplies and distributors and everything you need. But it would save you money in the long run, and you would get to control every aspect of the process. And so that's what Carnegie's interested in doing. Now, the other type of merger or integration is more the sneaky, conniving, mean one. It's about basically taking out your competitors who make the same thing. So think for a minute what kind of cell phone you have. Now, not just is it a Samsung or Android or iPhone. I mean, like, who is your carrier? Who is your provider? Do you have AT&T? Do you have Verizon? Do you have US Cellular? Who gives you your service? Sprint. So if, for example, if you said Verizon, I know a lot of kids around here have Verizon. If Verizon decides to lower their prices and lower their prices and lower their prices, so they basically lessen their profit, they may attract new customers. I might decide to leave AT&T because Verizon has such low rates and it's such a great deal. So they basically attract a new customer. They put AT&T out of business as they start to lose customers. And AT&T basically goes under. And if AT&T had any people who were still getting their service from them, now they basically join Verizon because the prices are so low. Well, then what happens is over time, they eventually have kind of a monopoly. They kind of wipe out their competitors. They're the only service around, so they have this monopoly. That's what happens when you only have one person or service providing a good. And then they usually raise their prices. So usually horizontal integration or mergers are great for robber barons. They're a way for them to make more money, but they're terrible for the average person. And that's what you can kind of see in the picture here. And we'll talk more about this later this week if this part's still kind of confusing. But John D. Rockefeller does this by putting the other oil companies out of business. The best way I can explain it to you is, as you're learning to drive now, or if you've been out with your family, if you come across a gas station and they're the only one for miles and they're on the interstate, they charge ridiculously high prices, like way higher than other places. Compared to like here in Geneseo, if I'm going to get gas, Casey's and Beck's right in the middle of town, right? Or I should say not middle of town, but closer to the interstate, they have similar prices because they're competing against each other, right? They have to go up against somebody. When there's no competition, when you're the only one around providing a good or service, you can afford to charge higher prices. And so it's a way to kind of control an industry and knock someone out. Now, as you are doing the book work on page 197, okay, you're going to be answering questions here about vertical integration and horizontal integration. And remember, vertical integration is the one that Andrew Carnegie really focuses on. And also remember, you don't turn in your book questions till the end of the chapter. At this point, you should have done page 185, and now you're working on page 197. Now, here's just a little chart to show you that during the Gilded Age, okay, so look at the 1890s, look at 1899, 1900. There are almost 1,000 mergers, okay, that year, which just shows you, really there's over 1,000 mergers, almost 1,200 mergers in 1900. It just shows you that one company is constantly kind of either buying out or combining with another to save money, to control production, and it's really in those robber barons' best interests. Now, if you look kind of once we get into the 20th century, the 1900s, those drop off dramatically. And that's because the government is going to step in and pass a law called the Sherman Antitrust Act, where it says trusts or monopolies are bad. They're bad for the consumer. And as I said, it means that we get stuck paying higher prices because we're the only one providing that product. And if we don't like it, tough. Just like if you're trying to get gas and they're the only one around for miles and you desperately need gas, you're going to pay that price. So they kind of have a monopoly on you at that point. And so for the most part, mergers are bad for consumers, great for robber barons at making profits. So just to wrap up talking about vertical versus horizontal integration, I know I'm really hammering this point, but I'm hoping that you understand the difference for the test. So vertical integration, you're buying up the materials, the supplies that you need to make your product. So if Carnegie was going to make steel, he would obviously have to have some kind of mine, right? And at the mine, they would be looking for the limestone, the shale, the iron. So he would be buying up the mine to begin with. Then he'd be buying up some kind of train or transportation network so he could move the good from one place to another. Then there would be the smelting process, basically the Bessemer process, where you're taking the impurities out of the iron, and then finally you're refining it and rolling it to try to create steel, which can be used for bridges and skyscrapers, and of course for railroad tracks, which is what Carnegie is interested in selling to make this fortune. You don't need to memorize the general stages of steel production. You're just focusing on the facts at the top, that Carnegie uses this vertical integration for his wealth. And we'll talk more about horizontal integration with Rockefeller later this week. So if you're kind of thinking in your mind, I'm still not sure if Carnegie is a good guy or a bad guy, if he is a hero or a robber baron, it's okay, that you're still not completely sure, what your thoughts are. The primary source documents in the background essay really do portray him in both lights, and that's because in reality he probably was both. A lot of people, in fact, probably think of him as a good guy, consider him to be more of, a hero, giving away so much of his fortune compared to Vanderbilt. A lot of people thought was a robber baron, but there's no correct answer here. There's just as many kids who choose to write that he is a robber baron as to he is a hero. Now, as far as evidence, when you're looking at those primary source documents, think about document C. Document C was literally a list of charities and places that he donated his money to. Okay, it shows him being a philanthropist, somebody who's giving money to libraries, colleges, performing arts centers, medical centers, ex-employees. That definitely portrays him as a hero, because a hero is someone who is concerned for others. But at the same point, if you think about document D in your primary sources, that was a political cartoon. We'll spend more time kind of analyzing political cartoons coming up. But in that political cartoon, it shows Carnegie, and he's kind of like two separate Carnegies, right, joined together. And on one side of that like stage or podium, he is giving money away like it's nothing, right? Just dollar bills, all right? Just throwing them in the air, giving them to whoever needs them, Scotland, the poor, universities, you name it. You can kind of see the same thing happening in this picture. He's spreading the wealth, so to speak. But on the opposite end, when his employees ask for higher wages, he says no. And we're talking about men who work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So they work 72 hours a week. They only got Sundays off because, it was a religious day. And he pays them to begin with like $1.20 a day. Eventually that goes up, but we're not talking about a lot of money here. Average income from his employees was anywhere from $350 to about $600. So a lot of these people are living well below the poverty line. They're struggling to make ends meet. A lot of them are living in tenement or slum apartments. And if they get sick, if they need medical care, because medical insurance was not a thing back then, they're definitely going to be struggling. We know that he does not allow his men to unionize. So they want to come together into an organization where they can hold meetings and protest and potentially go on strike and refuse to work if they don't get higher pay or safer conditions or shorter hours. And he says no. Eventually there is a strike in Homestead, Pennsylvania, where they demand better conditions. He brings in the police, it turns violent, and guess what? He ends up firing some of them all. It really does portray him, at least in that circumstance, as quite the robber baron. And some of these men even get blacklisted, which means that they will, no one will want to hire them because they're like, I don't want to hire Bobby. He's a pain in the butt. He goes on strike. He refuses to work. So when you're thinking about it, document C and document D are definitely very competing ideas. If you're kind of thinking about the other documents and trying to classify them as far as do they show him as a hero or robber baron, think about document A. That shows how he grew up very poor in that house in Scotland compared to the other large photo of that castle he pretty much bought in Scotland, that mansion. And yet again, it shows he'd rather spend his money on himself than his employees, yet again painting him as a robber baron. Now, last slide of notes today. When it comes to document B, though, Document B is when Andrew Carnegie writes about this gospel of wealth. And he talks about how if a man dies wealthy, then that's like the ultimate crime, and that's just wrong, and you can't take it with you. So he then, like from his own perspective, portrays himself as definitely a hero. Document E, the last primary source document, honestly is probably the most difficult text to read. And it basically kind of admits that Carnegie is a hero in some ways, that he does have philanthropic efforts, that he does give money to charity. So you could perhaps use a quote from there to support your reasoning if you're going to claim he's a hero. But then it goes on to say that the entire system itself is flawed because you do have industrialists like the men below, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, JP Morgan, who are so wealthy, and the whole system itself needs to change. It needs to be reformed because you can't have the vast majority of the population poor and this gap between rich and poor. So document E, I think, mostly classifies him as a robber baron, but you could perhaps find support for your hero argument and could kind of go both ways. And don't forget, you can use your background essay as you're writing. So last slide to talk about here is really, how do these men sleep at night? You know, how do they justify their wealth and say, it's okay that I'm this rich? A couple different reasons, okay? First reason, which I've been mentioning, is gospel of wealth. They basically say, and Carnegie is really into this mentality, they say, it's up to God. It's God's plan. It's God's will that we were born into this family. It's God's will that we had these talents, these aptitudes, these interests, that we were able to get rich. And all we can do is serve the public and serve God by donating some of our money. So just like Manifest Destiny kind of says, we have to expand westward. Who cares if we take land that's owned already by Indians? It's God's plan. This, yet again, kind of blames things on religion, or basically says it is God's will for us to be rich and for you to be poor. Yeah, that definitely sounds bad and very un-Christian-like. And this was kind of an excuse by some of these men, though. They just said, it's not up to me, it's all up to God. It's his plan that I'm rich and you're not. And at least they would go so far as to say that they should use their money to help others, to help the poor, and to serve others. And Carnegie especially, I really would say, is better about this than like J.D. Rockefeller or J.P. Morgan. He really does give away most of his fortune prior to his death and supports this gospel of wealth. But some of the men are like, nope, sorry you're poor. It wasn't in the cards for you. It wasn't part of God's plan. Now, the next kind of justification or excuse as to why they're rich and kind of gives them some ability to sleep at night so they don't feel bad that people are out there starving and how they're not paying them enough is something called social Darwinism. Now, you've probably heard of Charles Darwin. You've probably heard of evolution, you know, the idea that species change, that they evolve over time, that, you know, if a group exists and survives, it was meant to. They had the traits that were necessary. And I'm kind of explaining evolution very poorly here, but I think you've heard about it before. Now, you may have heard of the phrase survival of the fittest and have thought, oh yeah, Darwin, survival of the fittest. Some groups survive, some don't. That's actually misapplied to Darwin. Darwin never said that. A British man who's very racist and very crazy named Herbert Spencer, the sociologist, actually said that. And he took this phrase, survival of the fittest, and he was kind of a Darwin fan, and he misapplies it to people. I'm serious. And so he starts to say, oh, well, you're kind of mad because J.D. Rockefeller doesn't pay you enough, and you say you're going to starve to death? Well, I guess that's evolution. I guess you're meant to die. And I know that sounds absolutely terrible, and it is a little bit jaded. You know, they wouldn't probably be quite that open and honest about it, but they really did say crazy stuff like that. And some of them totally believed in their mind that it was okay that they made more money than their employees, and it was okay to basically mistreat them because if they didn't survive, they weren't meant to. That's evolution, weeding them out, taking out the weak, so to speak, and only the strong shall survive. They're like, well, why don't you get a second job? And people would say things like, well, I already work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and they're like, well, guess you didn't want to eat that day. Now, people like journalists, specifically one named Ida Tarbell, she started to expose some of the corruption and terrible comments that people like Rockefeller would say, but yet they continue to make these statements and to believe in them and refuse to pay their employees more. As more strikes will start to occur, that will start to change a bit. Now, the last reason why, or I should say the last way that these industrialists are able to justify their wealth is they say, it's not my fault that I'm rich, it's the government's fault. You know, we live in this capitalist economic system where we're focused on profit and private property, and the government believes in laissez-faire. Let it be. That, you know, they don't need to be involved in our lives, and they don't regulate how we treat our workers or how we pay them. And so since I don't have to pay them, I'm not going to. And yet again, that's just another excuse for why they're allowed to be kind of terrible people. So I wanted just to kind of fit that in there, because as you read through some of these documents and questions about Carnegie, they will refer to gospel of wealth and social Darwinism and laissez-faire and capitalism and such. And these are more just the justifications, the excuses that, you know, helped them to explain to others why it was okay they were rich and others were poor. But it's not a call to action to change things by any means. All right, guys, that wraps it up for now. I hope to see you at the next Google Meet, where we'll talk about those documents more, and we'll kind of help prep you for the quiz this week and your writing assignment. Later, guys.